Oh my God. Oh. Hi, Luke.
Hi, Cheryl. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Good, thank you. Albeit my headphones don't seem to be connecting at the moment. Hold on. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
perfect. So you've been up in London?
Yeah, it's been a manic day. We had the Garden of Remembrance service and then hot-footed it back home. And
where is the Garden of Remembrance?
Next to St Paul's.
Oh, right.
So we went from Plaisterers Hall, I guess you could call it almost a procession, a rabbled procession, and then laid crosses and things. So I'm just going to admit, is it Tanya or Tatiana?
I think generally, I'm going to call her Tanya, but I'm going to check that's how she wants to be called.
All right, okay, I'm going to admit her.
Hello, Tanya.
Hi. Hi.
Hi there.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hi.
Nice. Tanya, this is Cheryl. Cheryl, Tanya.
Hello. Hi.
Are you happy to be introduced
Hi,
as Tanya?
Cheryl.
Hi.
Yeah, that's fine. Is my internet connection okay? It's a little.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
sounds
good.
Sounds good. Do you want to check your screen share, Tanya?
Yeah, let's try that. I hope I'm gonna get through all my slides. Got a lot of slides.
That's looking good. Do you want to?
I'll go through quickly.
Yeah, just progress and make sure they're going backwards and forwards.
Yeah, we want to leave some time for discussion. I mean, it doesn't need to be huge, but it's often the most enjoyable bit when people, we actually have a proper chat about
Bit of interaction, yeah.
yeah, both your work and things more generally. So Tanya, are you now a livery person? Is that
I think
or
so.
you...
I haven't done the.
You haven't been to a court
Ceremony.
yet, have you? You haven't
No.
been to the court. So Tanya's like, you'll be at the next, you'll be at the New Year one, won't you? Where you agreed you could make the 26th
Yes.
of January.
Yes,
So
that's right.
Tanya's an active member, but yet to go through the Freeman ceremony.
Right. Okay. Great. I'll say.
And then, yeah.
I can confirm you're a new member.
Yeah.
Great. Cool.
Yeah, it looks crazy. I'm going to go on mute and hide myself.
So we have, how many people signed up?
Oh, actually, we've had a bit of I did a last minute push before I went to get my son. And when I came back, it had gone up to 26.
Okay.
So,
that's good.
Great.
yeah, so we've had a little bit of a last minute surge.
Excellent.
What's the time now? What is the time? I'm looking at my, what's the time exactly? 7. Oh, we've got loads of time. Yeah. I've got a waiting room on, so I'll let them all. I'll take the waiting room off at 6 o'clock. So, is there anything else you need to check, Tanya, or you're not certain about, or are you happy with all the technical?
I think it
working?
seems okay. Yeah,
Good.
I just hope I set my timer so I'm aware of my.
I'm sure we'll be fine. I'll ask people to put questions in the chat so they don't interrupt you while we're going along, but then obviously we can go through those and then hopefully have a sometimes you get lots of questions, sometimes not so many. So if there aren't many, I'll ask lots of questions, but if there are lots, then I will just field them.
I'm sure there'll be questions on the Highline because there's a lot that's still unresolved and it's quite a weird project. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing about it.
Always have people who do ask questions.
Sorry, Cheryl, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
That's better. Yep.
Oh, sorry, I've got my laptop and that's why I'm at a strange angle. You always have people who do ask questions, and thank God for them. They always do speak up. So hopefully Nigel Osteam will be here. I haven't actually checked because he's always good at asking questions. Right. Shall I start letting them in? Actually, I should say that. I don't think there's anyone in the waiting room yet, because it's nice to have a bit of a pre-chat. There's no one in the waiting room. I can't let them, even if I wanted to.
So we're collaborating, Tanya, on the
oh yes,
ANU.
that's great. Yeah, really pleased about that.
We'll send through some. I think we're going to have to start actually sort of providing information, but PRP are going to lead it. So hopefully,
that's good.
Some of the heavy lifting will be done by others.
Yeah, I know it's quite heavy, that lifting, isn't it? All those things.
I know. Yeah.
Much better being the little add-on. And even then, there's still quite a lot to do with all the blurb, getting it right.
Yeah.
It's quite good doing these little practice talks because you sort of review. I haven't done one for a while, and it's quite good going over the old slides and being like, oh look, there's a
Yeah, reminds you of things that you've perhaps either forgotten or are not at the front of your mind.
Yeah, you start to see crossovers between different projects that you hadn't really realised were related in such a direct way.
How are things generally? Busy by the sound of it? Talking to Catherine, she was coming back from Birmingham.
Yes, well, when that gets going, then we'll be really busy. Well, I'm really busy until, because we're getting this Highline planning application in for Christmas, and everything has a Christmas deadline. So I'm really busy up to Christmas, and then nothing.
Then you can relax, but something else will come up by then.
I think so, yeah. Well, there are other things kind of in the pipeline, but yeah, it's one of those things where you're so busy working on projects, there's no time to try and find new ones.
It's the eternal dilemma, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I know, it really is.
It's almost impossible to have the perfect balance. Don't think it exists. I haven't found it in 20 years. No,
exactly. It's so much work to find the new ones, and then if you don't do good work on the ones you actually have, then you can't get the new ones anyway. So
yeah, exactly. No, that is the best route to new work, but it unfortunately doesn't necessarily follow immediately or linearly from it.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's been a good autumn, definitely.
Well, nice that things are kind of returning to some level of activity and normality, or face-to-face meetings sometimes.
Yeah,
not tonight, but
we had a physical DRP on the Highline.
Oh, interesting.
They were giddy as they were like children who had loads of sugar. I think they literally had lots of sugar, actually. But it was a beautiful day, and we were outside and looking at the Highline. Everyone was so excited.
Yeah,
So
what's
perfect.
not to like?
Perfect to present, perfect circumstances to present to them.
So I've taken the waiting room off, guys, and
okay, great.
I will now mute. So
okay,
have a good presentation.
Thank you. Evening. Hi, Barry.
Hi, Luke. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Yeah.
Good.
I saw you won an award recently, did you? Building of the Year?
We did, actually. Thank you. Well noticed.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah, scheme down in Croydon from Brick by Brick.
Good, yeah.
Good evening, Neil, as well.
Oh. Good evening.
Hello, good evening. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is disconcerting. Everyone else has their name.
I don't know why it is. This is Ziva.
Ziva. Hi, Ziva.
Hi, Barry. We obviously missed one another. I didn't recognize you either. I said, who is this with a very trendy haircut?
Well, it's a non-haircut. I haven't had a haircut.
I'll be there with my scissors.
So we're expecting about 25 people. So we'll give it a couple more minutes, and then we'll get going. Good evening and welcome, everyone. we'll just give it another minute or two, because we are expecting 25 people. So a few join us, and then we'll get going. Hello, Nigel.
Hi, Luke. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you doing?
Yes, well. So, Chris, is that Weston Williamson going for branded gear? Very good. A whole new line.
Yep.
It's their casual wear range.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it must have been 1985. I organised a charity cricket match and invited a few architects to come along. And it was Max Hutchinson brought a team of about 11 people, and they all had Hutchinson and Partners gear on. And so yeah, I mean, we have this stuff to play in softball and five-a-side and stuff. It's quite nice. It's really comfortable when you're working from home.
Was Max Hutchinson's kit a three-piece suit, or?
It was very sophisticated. I remember that. Yeah, very nice.
We did some cycling jerseys for doing on a couple of occasions actually to do cycling outings.
Yeah,
quite nice.
I mean, everybody in the office likes it. I mean, they all love it when there's new merchandise. But yeah, it's nice. I mean, you often see. I've seen a few Alfred Hall, Monaghan Morris tote bags and things knocking around town. So I think everybody does it.
Tote bags are very common now, aren't they? To be honest, I think we've all got those.
Great. Well, whilst we may have a few more people joining, I think we should crack on. I'm conscious of everyone's evening and keeping to time, but thank you all for joining. I'd like to introduce you to Tanya from vPPR, who's a new company member and who's kindly agreed to give us a talk about their work and about the Camden High Line, which I'm very excited to hear more about, having seen it appear in the press fleetingly, and obviously the world famous High Line in New York, but keen to hear how it's coming to London. So I've known Tanya for a while, and we've collaborated on projects down in Croydon and are looking at other things together. So it's with great pleasure I introduce you to Tanya. Tanya, over to you.
Hi, thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. So vPPR Architects has been around for about 11 years. I started the practice with Catherine and Jessica in 2009, and we are currently about 11 people, mostly women, a couple of men now. For a long time we were only women. It's not non-intentional, but it kind of happened. And we started off really working on these sort of infill projects. So they were sort of leftover bits of London, kind of backfill, backland sites, old gardens, old industrial yards. And, we're really working with these very, they've generated these very unusual geometry and sort of typologies. So we've got to be quite experimental with those. One of the first projects we did was Ott's Yard, which was up for Stephen Lawrence Award. And in this project, I'd been working in New York at field operations who we're collaborating with on the High Line. And so landscape was always very important in here. You can see the sort of green roofs and all the courtyards being a very important part of the design, being as important as buildings themselves. This project Vaulted House then sort of followed that. That was shortlisted for House of the Year. And again, the courtyards are sort of in external rooms, so they have an equal importance to the house, but also this sort of reusing of a kind of post-industrial building. So the walls here, we kept all the perimeter walls, which was a taxi MOT garage. This one is on site at the moment, Connaught Road. It's actually semi-detached house. And this is one of the projects in Croydon, which is about to finish. Cold Harbour Road, these are 8 units with kind of shared entrances and staircases on an old ex-garage site. So that approach also kind of came into play in this project that we did for Redchurch Street, which got a RIBA London Award as an existing warehouse building, and we built 5 new residential units and 3 new shops, and there was a basement, and we did all of this with tenants sitting in the top 2 floors. So it was quite an intense project, very tricky and fiddly, and but I think we tried to approach these things with sort of trying to keep a sense of the industrial history of the site, but also doing something that's quite kind of clear and bold within it. And at the same time, we've been doing quite a lot of exhibition design. We did this very big blockbuster exhibition at the Barbican, which sadly most of the time it was on was shut down because of the pandemic. It opened 2 weeks before everything shut down. But this was an exhibition called Masculinities, and it's a big photography exhibition. But some of that language of kind of frames and kind of very strong forms within the kind of existing building, I think related to that Redchurch Street project actually. We also didn't, that was also shut down by the pandemic, but we also had a room in the British Pavilion this year where we were looking at how teenagers use public space. And again, we're very interested in the context, being able to get up into the roof light in the room and be able to climb up the frame and into this hammock. We've done quite a few projects now looking at sort of children and teenagers. This is from nursery school in South London, with almost a kind of face in the elevation. And this little tiny landscape for Higham Hill Park made out of pink concrete, which either serves as an amphitheatre or just kind of seating for the cafe, and it's very well used. And then we took on this very large project from Dixon Jones. They asked us to be executive architects when they disbanded, and to see this project through. So this is the steps at Wembley Way. So I think all these projects, in a way, they kind of contributed to winning this Highline project. We went in with field operations. Our practice is very, very local to the High Line. And of course, field operations have the experience, but they're very far away. So I think it was a kind of quite an important symbiotic relationship. So field operations loosely are a sort of lead project architects, and they're responsible for everything that happens on the top side, and we're the kind of local feet on the ground and very embedded in the local community. So we've been dealing a lot with things that you need to be physically here for, but also we're responsible for all of the architectural elements, so all of the access points, lifts and kiosks, and there's quite a bit of that. So the client is Camden Town Unlimited, which formed this not-for-profit group, Camden High Line. It's basically the same thing. It's a tiny outfit. There's pretty much 3 people, and but they have a huge amount of reach. These are the stakeholders. Basically a nightmare, really tricky, all of them to deal with. and Transport for London. In fact, all of them have been quite challenging. There's also a huge amount of community stakeholders, and the client has for a long time been doing outreach with schools and various groups in the neighbourhood, and that's kind of continuing as we develop the plans. We're working with Street Space, who are engaging with the Maiden Lane Estate and Agar Grove, but that's been a challenge as well to reach those communities there and actually get them to kind of come in and talk to us. So I think one really important thing for us was to reflect Camden in some way. It's has so much energy. It's exciting. There's amazing music, street art. It's also dirty and crowded and infuriating. And I think all of those things are kind of important in kind of understanding the context of the High Line. It's obviously a lot of street art and graffiti everywhere. It's quite run down, but then there are these pockets of space which are very quiet and provide a sort of oasis from all of that hustle and bustle. And so I think that's where the High Line sort of sits in this. This is the High Line today. Runs from Camden Gardens here, sort of just by the Lab Tech development, Hawley Wharf, and goes all the way through to York Way, and you can see that tower. It's part of the new part of the development of Maiden Lane, and obviously there's King's Cross development here, and this is that this kind of tarmac and cement works in between. So it's about 1.5 kilometres long. Has these very different conditions. It has the masonry arches, and it also has the metal bridges that go over the roads. A lot of those, on the High Line side of the line, the landscaping has been removed, the rail tracks have been removed, so they provide this rather amazing sort of filtered light and these wonderful views through, kind of strange views of the city that we're not used to seeing. And then obviously the trains are a key characteristic, and your relationship to them up there, where you're lower than the platform, so you're kind of at the height of the wheels, and actually your eye level is almost at the floor of the train. So it's quite unusual, and you get these very big freight trains rumbling through, and it's very atmospheric actually. A lot of it looks very much like this. You can see all the kind of Network Rail assets, the OLE lines, various lighting, cables going through these boxes, and just lots of stuff to avoid. And we have to keep it all in place because the High Line is on a 25-year lease, which obviously we hope will be renewed, but we can't guarantee it. So everything has to remain as is, and nobody knows what any of the cables are for anyway, so we can't cut any of them, can't remove any of them. So this gives a sort of sense. These are some of the other assets up there that we have to keep: boxes, various gantries and things. So it's very constrained. This is about 8 to 9 meters above the street level, and this is probably the widest part by Camden Road. Goes down to under 2 meters wide. We have field operations will be responsible for creating a separation wall between the park on one side and the live trains on the other side. The idea is that would be kind of semi-transparent, but it can't be metal because you have to be, I think, 5 meters away from the OLE lines to use metal officially, and we have to avoid all these kind of various things. So this shows a kind of range of widths. It goes up to 17 meters, which is quite generous around Camden Road Station, and down to 1.2 meters at one bottleneck near Maiden Lane. And this just shows the kind of master plan in the context of the city and the connections, the key connections really. I mean, a lot down to King's Cross. And of course, there's a huge amount of development going along Camley Street, which I'm sure you know about, with Field and Clegg Bradley Studios doing a big project up here. on St Pancras Way, there's a lot of sites, maybe some of you are working on, and then obviously you've got the connections along the canal and to Regent's Park. And I think that the High Line as a kind of counterpart to the canal is very important, but the canal gets very, very busy, and I think the idea is the High Line will be a much slower space. So these are the different phases. We're currently in phase 1, which is between Camden Gardens and Camden Road Station. It's not very long, but it's a lot going on there. Phase 2 would take us up to Camley Street, and we have to develop that obviously in relation to what's happening with what Field and Clegg Bradley are proposing. So that's very much in development because they're at a different stage to us. And then phase 3 would take us all the way up to York Way. So field operations have proposed these 4 areas that relate sort of to the types of land, the types of conditions really that exist up there in terms of the width. So there's the Woodland Balcony, Woodland Catwalk, the rail yard, railway gardens, and the wilds. And these are the access points that we're looking at. So Camden Gardens, Camden Road Station, an optional one, St Pancras Way. We felt we ought to try and pick up that St Pancras Way, the developments there potentially, Camley Street, and then York Way at the end. This was from the competition boards, just showing this kind of green thread that creates a direct pedestrian route from Camden Gardens up to York Way, where currently you have to really wave around sort of very intricate grid of streets. It's quite complicated to get from one place to the other if you're not local. And then some of the design approaches that were proposed, so the idea of it being a kit of parts. I think that's also very pertinent to the idea of a circular economy, and that's very important, not only to us, but also to the client. And given the 25-year lease, you know, the idea that this thing could be dismantled and the parts reused elsewhere is quite important to us. There's almost no demolition in what we're proposing. Everything is just built on what's there. So it should be a very sustainable proposal. Dynamic planting, we're working with Pete Aldolf, a sort of ecological corridor, and picking up on other ecological corridors through the city, but also blending in some horticultural planting and maybe some beekeeping and various things that have kind of community uses. And then the idea of the drama of the thing, this kind of balconies and overlooks and vistas, taking advantage of those wherever we can. And then the access points themselves being a kind of dramatic insertion into the city. And we've been kind of viewing these almost as urban follies. You see the city from very unusual heights and positions you wouldn't normally see, kind of weaving through existing structures a lot of the time. And they have to also serve as beacons to show people that there is this life going on at the top. So they're quite key in the sort of experience of the High Line from the street. So the first access at Camden Gardens, probably know Camden Gardens, but if you don't, it's this triangular little garden. It's protected by the London Squares Preservation Act. Got Kentish Town Road on one side and Camden Street on the other, and 3 open arches. And then you've got Water Lane down here and the canal. So there's a sort of wheelchair accessible route from the canal into Camden Gardens there, and then a quite steep staircase here. And as a sort of master plan proposal, we're looking at proposing a shared street just to try to slow down traffic here, because it is quite bus heavy. And it potentially quite a lot of people coming across here. I think there is already a zebra crossing proposed at this point, which is good. But this isn't forming part of our planning application. It's kind of just a proposal for Camden to consider. So these are the existing gardens. They're very underused because they're sort of a traffic island, but there's some quite interesting, quite big mature trees, and you know, they're rather beautiful arches, quite well preserved, not much graffiti. So these are the 3 open arches. One of them shrinks to a narrow point because of the geometry of the street. And this big electrical box on the top we have to avoid, so we need to enter east of that box. So the idea here was to produce a different program for each arch. So the western arch contains a kiosk, a large kiosk with a stair that goes up and forms a roof to the kiosk and also a landing, and then wraps back round. The central arch is open, but there's a really long communal table in the middle of it. And the eastern arch has a small cafe, maybe sort of ice cream place, and a little ancillary space behind. And we've got a lift here tucked in. And this just shows you from the top side how the stair loops back on itself. And then we have a catwalk that runs alongside the masonry structure so that we can enter at the metal bridge over the road, where it's potentially a bit simpler to remove a panel. So this is the kind of massing of it from the north side. And as you kind of come up the stair, you have a balcony where you can see over the tops of trees, and you kind of wind through, you come up the stairs and you see, you come up into the top of the arch, but you also experience the sort of the detail and the brickwork of the masonry arch. So it's kind of threads its way through. But crucially, it provides a view from Water Lane and from Camden, so that because the approach to this access point will be from both the south and the north, we felt it's important to kind of have an expression on both sides of the viaduct. So that just shows the kind of heights that we're dealing with. And once you come up, this is a field operations slide that shows their proposal for the Woodland Balcony, which runs between Camden Gardens and Camden Road, avoiding these sort of various things. But also interesting, shows that the Camden Road Station platform 2 almost is the length of this whole section. And so we're proposing that this kind of western end of the platform would be an alternative exit. So in fact, you'd be able to access Camden Road Station directly from Camden Gardens. And within this area, there's some seating steps and event spaces and the kind of woodland area. And these are some of the beautiful images that field operations made of the top side, some ideas about visibility through a kind of semi-transparent separation wall, and some ideas about the planting and the kind of language of the furniture. And this is the proposal for the bridge over Camden Road, where there's some planting so that it can kind of hang down over the side of the bridge to signal that there's something going on up there. There's a little plaza here, rather unloved plaza, which we're hoping will become landscape, potentially even some shared space here again. And the access, which we're proposing currently, although there are other options in progress which are not yet public, so I can't talk about them. The official access is through Camden Road Station itself. So the idea is that you would come through the turnstiles up onto platform 2, and there would be a second set of turnstiles from the platform into the park. So you would touch in and then touch out, and you wouldn't be charged for that journey through. So obviously lots of challenges around that, but I think whatever happens, we are looking at creating some entrances off the platform and onto the High Line itself. So then they've characterized this as the Woodland Catwalk because it crosses through these 3 bridges, quite straight, it's quite narrow, but quite interesting going over the girders. And then we get to St Pancras Way, where we're looking at just a very narrow, small stair that it's very tight here, that would bring you up, I think could be quite dramatic, coming up through the girders. So this just sort of shows an image of how that might feel, maybe suspended from the structure. And this sort of idea of planting hanging through the structure and signaling that there's this park above. Then this rail yard gardens, I think this has quite a lot of play areas and education spaces that takes you from St Pancras Way to Camley Street. So, and so maybe potentially some community garden space. And at Camley Street, I mean, this is slightly a placeholder because all of this is likely to be raised. And this rather unfriendly, although quite interesting from a photographic point of view, this stair is very unsafe currently in terms of antisocial behaviour. But it actually takes you up and across this railway bridge and over to the Maiden Lane estate. So it's actually quite a key access point for Maiden Lane across here, but also not a very safe one. It does have this quite a nice view of the tracks that pass under the viaduct. So the idea is that we just create a straight run, kind of more dramatic stair, maybe a little balcony, maybe a lift. All of that, as I say, could change, and it could be something much, much bigger depending on how this public square develops. And then this is a very narrow part. You can see here how the High Line connects with the public space. There's a football pitch, I think it's a basketball maybe, that is part of the Maiden Lane estate. And the idea is that it would sort of open up onto that. But then you have this, because of the drop in level here, it gets extremely narrow along this point. So it's kind of really a straight path of planting on either side and brings you to York Way. Some of the ideas here. Again, kind of education settings, bug hotels and things. And there's actually the kind of remnants here of the old Maiden Lane station. So it's kind of a ruin, which we're basically proposing to retain and create a sort of courtyard in here. So this was the station building. You've got kind of bricked up windows and various pieces here that we're kind of going to play with. And we quite like this overgrowth, the sort of buddleia and things growing out of the wall. So the idea would be that we kind of retain, because it's quite busy at York Way here, obviously, and actually at the moment there's a lot of industrial sort of construction vehicles coming down. It's very dusty and not very pleasant. So we thought that actually keeping kind of a separation from the street, so you go into a sort of calmer zone before you go up to the High Line, was a good threshold. There's a kiosk here, and then there's sort of slow stair coming up and winding through with a little balcony that pokes through that bricked up window, and then a lift, and there might be some sort of trees and things in the courtyard. So this was the sort of idea of the stair winding through that ruin. It's kind of urban folly. And just an image, a sort of initial image of it, and you can see the stair dotted in behind. And so that's, I think, am I to time? I had to rush through a bit.
Perfectly to time. Yes, great.
It's just the sort of reminders.
Fantastic. Thank you. Actually, could you go back a slide? So perhaps when people ask questions, we can refer to the different conditions. Well, Tanya, thank you. That was fascinating. And I know I've got some questions, but if others would like to jump in, please raise your hand or just unmute yourself. And Nigel, please go ahead.
Hello. That's fantastic. I really look forward to seeing this. And I mean, it occurs to me that, you know, you mentioned about social difficulties with some of these areas. How much is that an issue that you need to deal with in terms of making sure that these spaces are managed and maintained and so on? I mean, I get it's not really distinctly part of the design, but, you know, clearly you need to understand the management of them and how Camden will preserve them and maintain them and so on.
Yeah, no, I think it is very much part of the design, actually. And I mean, currently we're proposing that the park is only open during regular park hours. That's, you know, dawn to dusk. And the kiosks actually, and the arches where we've got kind of commercial activities happening in the arches, provide quite a key source of income, which will pay for gardeners and people to be up there a lot of the time. So it will be quite, there will be sort of people around very, you know, and people at the end of the day will be sort of chaperoned off the High Line. But obviously there's only a limited amount that you can do. I mean, we are going through, you know, various consultations with police and looking at how to make it secure. But in the end, someone is going to be able to climb up there. So it's quite a big question how far you go to secure it. And I think we've taken the view at the moment that we'll go to the separation fence in general, but perhaps we need to be more cautious. I'm not sure.
And sorry, while I'm on, another question is really the question of the proximity of the railway station. I'm presuming there has to be a sensible degree of separation from the railway lines, rather. There has to be a sensible, you know, appropriate level of separation and managing that within the overall look and feel of the, you know, the development, so that you. Yeah,
but I mean, the separation wall goes quite close to the line. I think it has to avoid the sort of in line with the gantries. But you can see in this image here the kind of wall that divides it, but it is all quite close. And, you know, in a way that's part of the sort of spirit of it. Once you're up there now, although there's no, you know, there's obviously no separating screen. I think it's important that you can see the trains and spot the trains and hear this, you know, you can't get away from the sound of them. I mean, that's always going to be, they're always going to rumble through, but I think that's really part of the experience.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thanks.
Anybody else? Thanks, Nigel.
Can I ask a question?
Go for it, Barry. Please.
Tatiana, that was fantastic. Thank you. I was just thinking about the horrible Marble Arch experience and how the reality didn't any way match the imagery. And I just wonder, you know, whether you've got enough kind of planting depth and all those sorts of things to make sure it really is as lush as it looks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the advantage of you know, I think that the client made the right choice to choose a landscape architect as the principal, as a project lead. And obviously they have the experience on the New York High Line where the constraints in terms of planting depths and things are rather similar. Mm-hmm. They've got various different ways of dealing with depth. So in some areas they're looking at mounding up. We have to leave what's there because we're assuming it's contaminated. It's most likely contaminated, as the report from the engineers have said. And other options they're looking at are these bags. They're kind of Hessian bags full of earth, and two guys can lift one. They're quite big, but they're just full of earth basically, and you kind of can make a grid of them. So that could be used in some areas. And in other areas where you've got the path, you might have the path might actually be lower than the mounded up planting on the side. And actually, when you look at the New York High Line, there's a lot of different levels of planting that allow you to have bigger trees, bigger root balls, which are higher up, and then sort of lower planting that's nearer the paths. So I think that there's, I think it's a very different skill set involved in this. And because it's landscape led, that's not my main worry. I think my worry more is just making sure we can raise enough funds, and that's actually looking very rosy at the moment. So, fingers crossed. And then there's just dealing with Network Rail, which is
I can imagine that's a nightmare.
Which is a nightmare.
I was going to ask about the funding. I mean, where does the funding come from?
Well, I think for this phase, that Argent and LabTech are key funders. And I think hopefully they will put the hand in their pocket again, because they will both benefit quite heavily, but that's obviously work in progress. There have been other businesses, particularly at King's Cross. You can kind of imagine who the main contenders might be, who also see a benefit. And so I think it will, and then there's I mean, the crowdfunding I think will produce quite a small amount. And then I think that the GLA is also going to put quite a bit of money into it. So I think that they will get there. And I think that the client is very, very good at that aspect of things. So, they're very good at making things happen. So I was a little bit nervous at the beginning, but it's looking much more positive. And I think they've already an offer for almost half of the funding for phase 1 from one single entity.
Tanya, you mentioned there were 3 phases
on the bandwagon, then all the rest will follow.
Yeah,
3 phases. So
over what timeline? Is it hoped?
Well, it's hoped that, we could even start phase 1 next year, but, I think maybe start detailing it next year. I think 2023 is the hope for that. And I think phase 2 and phase 3, depending on what happens with Camley Street, could potentially actually become certainly one planning application, and whether it could even be built in one go, I'm not sure. But the timeline is sort of looking, they're trying to get it all done by sort of 2005, 2006, I think.
Right. Sorry, 2026.
26.
Yeah. And you mentioned field operations. You worked with them before, so this was born of previous collaboration or experience?
Yes, I worked for them on the New York High Line actually, after I graduated and before I set up vPPR with my partners. So we have a very close working relationship, and our systems in the office are frankly kind of based a lot on theirs. We use the same softwares and have very similar design approaches. So it's been a very smooth relationship despite the distance. They're actually here this week for the second time. But for a lot of the development of the project, they weren't able to get here because of the restrictions.
Yeah, of course. And there's, unlike the New York High Line, or you haven't perhaps shared it, a sort of night lighting scheme. You mentioned dawn to dusk. Is it not needed because of that?
Well, there is actually. We are actually working with Spears Major, who are doing the lighting, and I think certainly. I think there's one aspect which is just even at night showing that there's something up there as a sort of signal for people to then return in the day. But also between Camden Gardens and Royal College Street, there's quite a lot of event space. And I think that will probably be rented out in the evenings. And so there'll need to be lighting to get up to that part. And I mean, maybe they find a way to manage it at night. It would be amazing if it was at least open a bit beyond dusk in the winter. But no, at the moment they're really just talking about dawn to dusk, and then the event spaces being open later.
Yeah, it seems like a extraordinary task of organisation when you put up the stakeholders slide.
Yeah.
All the people you have to coordinate with. Makes building look quite straightforward in some ways.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with the project, is that the designers are sort of, in a way, has been, I mean, it's still a lot of work on our part, but a lot of our work has also just been kind of understanding who all the stakeholders are, because even besides the ones I pulled up, there are other landowners and things who have leases on arches which you might not to use, and various neighbours and things who are quite intimately connected with it. So it's understanding the whole kind of ecosystem around it, social ecosystem around it. That's one of the challenges, because although it's quite small, in a way it's quite simple, it cuts through so many different parts of the city.
And you giving it a 25-year design life, or is it the idea that it's actually kind of sufficiently robust that if it's fortunate to be successful and the lease gets extended, then it doesn't need to be kind of rebuilt?
Yeah, that's the plan. I think in any case that, you know, we're hoping that the materials can be reused afterwards. So we are going for quite robust materials. In a way, we're sort of sitting between two circular economy recommendations, because I think their cutoff is 25 years, but we're hoping to get beyond that. So we're sort of designing for a really long lifespan, but that could also be dismantled.
Yeah, great. Anyone else have any questions? Chris, I would have thought surely as an architect of infrastructure, you must have a difficult question for Tanya. Peter,
I've got a question, Luke. Actually,
go for it. Over to you.
I mean, well, two points. One was that the High Line in New York has become a very good, I might say, almost commuting route. It's a great way of walking quite long distances in Manhattan without having to deal with crossings and things on a regular basis. Do you see this as wandering or walking? And then the other one is there any way, and clearly people like King's Cross, Argent related, can see the benefits of something like this to their development. But of course, the great success of the High Line was the close relationship between land use around the line and the benefits that gave to developers. And is there any way of getting that and the current English planning system?
Yeah, so on the first point, I mean, I think inevitably it is going to become, to some extent, a bit of a commuter route. But I think if you look at the sort of layout of the paths and things, they're quite meandering, they're quite winding. So apart from in that sort of phase 3 where there's not much you can do about, you can't meander very much within that width, it does kind of force a slightly slower route than, for instance, the canal, which is very direct and has a lot of cyclists on it and gets quite very busy. So I think it would be probably a pedestrian commuter route to some extent, but it is, the idea was always more about wandering, but events may overtake us. And then I think in terms of the developers, I mean, we're definitely speaking to people all along the route. And obviously, if you can think of anyone that we should be speaking to, that would be very, very useful. I think that there are lots of small businesses, and obviously, or maybe not obviously, but Camden Unlimited is the Camden bid. So they are in sort of contact with all of those people. But we are hoping that there will be maybe smaller contributions from other people along that route. But I wonder also about developers along St Pancras Way, and obviously in Camley Street as well.
I'm not a planner, but would it not be feasible in the Camden local plan for them to allow greater density within a certain area around something like this, that would then they could use the Section 106 to help fund the project?
Well, I suppose to some extent that might be true on Camley Street. So I think that there is potentially quite a lot of density proposed there, and I think that we would be trying to get our hands on some of that Section 106 money on our part there. I wonder if that might be true on St Pancras Way, and I think that's a good point. Maybe it's something that we discuss with the. We're working quite closely with, because obviously Camley Street is actually a Camden development. Camden own the land there, so we are in quite close contact with the development manager on Camden side. So it's definitely worth a conversation with her about other potential Section 106 areas in exchange for density.
Thank you. I've got one more, Luke, actually, if nobody else has. I mean, there are masses of these little spaces, aren't there? on lines around London. Are you doing anything to, might say, seek out further projects that might utilise the bits of spare space that British Rail have left us?
I think it's definitely would be interesting to look at. I mean, I think it's trying to find enough length to make it worth the while, because there's so much work involved in it that, where you need it to kind of run quite a decent length of the city in a continuous line to sort of make it worthwhile. But I think it's I think it would be interesting to look at. I think there are other, a lot of people have been trying to get their own high lines. I know that there was a movement in Shoreditch to try and do something there, and I think there's other parts of London as well.
Yes, Peckham is doing one, which seems to be making slow progress, I think, largely due to lack of funds. Yeah, I think I have to say that the client is really amazing. I mean, they have so much energy, and they're really, I think, too much volume, and they've got it off the ground, and that's no small feat.
And I guess if you've got a modular approach, presumably there could be some economy in scale if it does take off, and you can know how much per linear meter you've got of planting and walkway. That's true, yeah. Roll it out across the city. Well, it'd be great if it gets further traction as well. Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you hear me, Luke?
Neil, hi, welcome.
Just a very good question, Tatiana. That was fascinating, very interesting. Just maybe an obvious question or an obvious answer. Can it not extend either way?
I know, I wish it could. I wish it could. At Camden Gardens, it then forks, and you've got, I think it's a freight line going, no, you've got a freight line going lower, and then the upper line is the overground. But there isn't really any space on the side there. And then once you get to York Way, I think part of the issue at York Way may have been the borough border. But there's also the, there's a sort of new line in there. So there's a lot less space. As you can see how it kind of thins out in phase 3. It sort of thins out and disappears. But I think that's certainly worth looking at on the east side. I haven't been further east to kind of investigate how, whether there's a way you could, maybe you have to drop it a bit and then join a bit further on. I think probably it was because it was outside of Camden Unlimited's remit that it wasn't included. But it'd be interesting to see.
It's in there, doesn't it, I suppose? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you. It would be lovely to see it expand and lovely to see it happen. I hope it's sooner than 2024, 25, I think. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Anybody else? Anybody else have a question?
Have you got a planning permission yet, or is it in process?
In process. So we're submitting Christmas.
Okay.
So pretty soon. It's almost all there. We've had our DRP and had several pre-apps. And it's all very positive so far.
Yeah. Are there any issues of overlooking and that sort of stuff when you're going past houses and things?
On the whole, there isn't. There are actually only a couple of points where it might be an issue. And I think in those cases, you can step back the path and have planting, create a kind of barrier that way. But actually, interestingly, you're definitely over 18 meters to other windows, but a back of houses and things. And in terms of sound, you've already got the sound of the train. So I suppose it's a different kind of sound, hearing people talking, different pitch. Yeah. But when we went up there with the planners, that it was actually not something that they were. I did ask them about it, and they're not too concerned. Yeah.
The other question that occurred to me when you were talking, you said you couldn't make the dividing structure out of metal. What is it made out of?
They're looking at GRP. Right. So this is kind of plastics, but it's very limited what they can use. Yeah. And actually, it's it's very frustrating because there's loads of metal stuff that Network Rail puts up there.
Mm.
Everything they put up is made of galvanized steel, but we're not allowed to use it.
Given the success of the New York one, are there others around the world that are already kind of underway that I'm not familiar with?
Oh, predating the New York one is the Promenade Plantée in Paris. And then I don't actually know of any others. There's various things that field operations have worked on, like low line. There's a low line, I think, somewhere in maybe in Chicago or LA. But I don't actually know of any other completed high lines yet. But everyone wants them. I've seen them in several master plan drawings recently. So it's sort of a bit of a thing. And actually, we were trying to change the name to Camden Viaduct, so it wasn't quite such a direct comparison. But I think the client quite likes the name because it makes it very clear when they're fundraising what it is.
Yeah.
But it'll feel completely different to the New York one. It doesn't have that sort of the New York one has these very long vistas out of it, and on this one you've got quite high parapets on either side.
Given the kind of difference between the cities and the organizations and all of the other sort of, I guess, non-physical differences, have you had to develop a completely different kind of rule book for consultation and the development of it, or was there one produced for the story of the New York High Line? Is it following a well-trodden path, or are you having to kind of explore as you go along and invent?
I think it's really different. I think that some of the physical constraints, as I was saying earlier, are similar, if not identical. The dealing with contaminated soil, building on this sort of viaduct structure, how to deal with planting on that, how to get things up there. There's sort of various things like that. And I mean, the High Line in New York is also a kind of kit of parts. But I think that the sort of planning landscape and the the kind of stakeholders is a completely different thing, and the process in that sense is very different. So, and in a way, I think it's not a disadvantage for field operations to be able to be a bit sort of wide-eyed and kind of ingenue about it, because it means that they can ask quite direct questions that and they can kind of try to tease out very direct answers from various different stakeholders, which maybe if they'd been working more in London they would have not been able to get away with. But for instance, we have a very, very tight planning deadline, and so far we're on track.
Good luck with 6 weeks to go or 8 weeks to go.
No.
And given the rather checkered history of investing in infrastructure, and you mentioned the kind of sponsorship, what lessons, if any, have you taken from the Garden Bridge failure? Was that discussed?
We're very conscious of the Garden Bridge and the Marble Arch Mound, and I think it's just it's coming from such a different place. It's very grassroots, this. I mean, the budget on it is really quite tight, and the fee is really very tight. And so it just feels like a very different operation. I mean, they were casting about for some sort of celebrity faces to try and attract funding, but I'm not sure if that actually is a bit double-edged. Kind of, it's a tricky one, fundraising, isn't it? Because you have to put your head above the parapet, but you have to do it in a very careful way so that you don't end up with a lot of negative press. And people I mean, talking with James Corner about, you know, there's so much positivity in America. Everyone wants everything. Everyone's really happy for everyone. They see the benefit and everything. But you know, we can be quite down on things here, and it's interesting because you project like this, everyone's doing it really not for profit, and it is very grassroots, and it's come from the grassroots, and you still get people saying, oh, it's going to you know be terrible, it's going to do these awful things, and you sort of think, well, you know, come on. this is going to be great for everyone.
It'll be a grudging huge success at the end of it when everyone says, oh, actually, yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, exactly.
After 8 years of battling through. Well, I mean, I'm very excited to see it develop, because it's the sort of thing that really could and should be happening, you know, not just in London, but more widely. And it's, you know, there are so many reasons why it doesn't happen. So it'll be a fantastic testament to the whole team when phase one gets going and people start to, you know, hopefully it does gain some momentum, and people get on board and accelerate phase 2 and 3 together.
Yeah, I think that's the hope. I think once we get I think, you know, I mean, it could also probably be built relatively quickly once it's all sort of gone through. So, you know, hopefully we can get a spade in the ground next year, and that would be fantastic. And then I think we would have the momentum to push through with the next 2 phases. And there is, I think it is dovetailing with sort of Camley Street that's going to be part of the challenge, because that could be, we don't know how long that's going to take them to develop their designs.
Yeah. Well, I think if you can prove the case, you know, in phase 1, then it's presumably most of the battle's been won. Or you'd hope so, at least.
I think it's also the phase where, you know, there's quite a lot going on. There's the event spaces and the kiosks and the, you know, the kind of, in the way, the most visible access points. And so I think it's in a way the densest part. It's kind of most activity around that phase, and hopefully it start to generate some income itself.
Yeah, Chris has asked about the current state of financing, which I think you've covered, but also says that Seoul is a good reference. Chris, do you want to expand on that and say why?
Yeah, so the Seoul, I can't remember the name of the station that it comes out of, but there's a live line, and yet they've managed to do something similar to the High Line in New York, which is very similar to what Tatiana has been describing. But there's a lot of mature trees in nice planters with nice seating around it. It's a good reference to look at. But I think, yeah, it would be great to see, as Peter says, there's a few of these disused viaducts. It'd be so nice for London to see this take off. It would be really good. It looks really impressive.
I think it's also, yeah, it's sort of you on this quite small, you know, it's quite a small project, 1.5 kilometers, to develop all that knowledge about how to use it and then not be able to roll it out elsewhere would be a shame, because there's so much learning going on this, and will continue to as we go on into actual construction. You're right, it would be amazing to be able to apply it elsewhere,
because it really does regenerate the urban place as well. The East London line is just fantastic. The side of the Kingsland Road where you've got amazing bars and restaurants opened up because of projects like this have opened up the arches. It will be fantastic if it happens. I mean, it was earmarked for the Channel Tunnel link from HS2, from Old Oak Common to the Channel Tunnel. But obviously that's not going ahead now. So it's great. It would be great if it was used as part of urban regeneration.
Yeah, well, definitely. I wonder how to sort of approach that. I suppose it's going directly to Network Rail really and asking them about their. I mean, I think that in a way, field operations have done a good job of communicating with Network Rail, and there's now a champion there who's sort of at the top, who's trying to push it through. Because part of the problem is it's just obviously the size of the organisation, as I'm sure you are well aware, and you talk to one person and they say that's so and such as possible, and the next time you meet someone else and they say it's not. And the kind of confusion of that.
It's always the maintenance and the loadings and the people that are in charge of making sure that the structures can be surveyed for the next 100 years, that are key to getting them on board. But it's possible. It just takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
Keep going. Great. Well, I'm conscious of time and everyone's evening, but Tanya, thank you so much for sharing that with us. It was fascinating, great to see, and obviously we're all excited and enthused about it going forward. So please do keep us in touch, and obviously if we can help in any way, please let us know. But we wish you every luck and as they say in Japanese, gambate, which means keep working hard.
Thanks very much for having me. And if anyone knows of anyone who we should be contacting in terms of funders, then definitely let me know, because every little helps.
Absolutely. We look forward to, as a new member of the company, we look forward to seeing you at a company event soon, I think in January, if not before. Great. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice evening.
Bye.
Cheers.